Well, everybody, Wes McDonald here, and as you can see, virtually at least, that wall did a pretty good job of keeping me away, but I've got it on good authority that it's coming down soon. I've been in the managed print space for a lot of years now, since the early days of Printfleet, before they even had software. A lot has changed since then for all of us, especially in these last couple of years. And as that change has come about, I've actually had a ton of fun helping dealers just like you and partners to adjust their business offerings as delivery models, productivity technologies, and customer buying habits continue to evolve. After this video, I will be kind of in Asheville, at least via Zoom, to take your questions. And fortunately, a very good friend of mine and business partner, Kenneth Edmonds, is there as well, and he'll be able to field some of your questions too. If there's one lesson we've all learned over the last couple of years, it's this: that we have to adapt, because the rate of change, both planned and unexpected, have completely changed how we work together. And that's what flat rate is really at its core. It's adapting the existing business models that we're all used to meet the needs and new workflows and the new realities that make up this thing that we call work. It's actually kind of fitting, although a bit of a bummer, that I'm not in Asheville speaking to you in person, that I'm doing what I can remotely. As business owners, this isn't anything you haven't had to learn how to just cope with, but master to benefit from, for the people that work for and the customers that you serve. Remote work, love it or hate it, it's not going anywhere. It's either in part or some kind of hybrid fashion where we oscillate between home and the office. Nobody knows what that final mix is going to look like, but suffice to say, there's no going back to the way that things were. But as a wise person once said, kick in the video.
I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us.
Very wise words indeed, Gandalf. Thank you. Listen, today we're going to be speaking about flat rate for managed print, and more specifically, how to sell flat rate, how to compensate for those who are selling it, to look for opportunities where maybe you didn't even think they were when customers are already in a long-term contract. You know, there's been a lot of confusion around flat rate for managed print, and my hope is that after today, a lot of that will be cleared up. If I really do a good job today, not only will there be less confusion, but there could be a whole lot more excitement around getting your flat rate program moving. All right, let's get started, shall we? So before we go any further on the how of selling flat rate, let's talk a little bit about what flat rate is not. It's not device-based billing, and it's not user-based billing. And I've heard endless conversations around whether or not it should be based on devices or people, and I'm here to tell you that that's absolutely the wrong discussion. You see, if we just focus on the billing mechanism, we'll be up to our eyeballs in the same situation we are right now with cost per page, this race to the bottom. We'll have a new way to bill, but we'll still fall short on the managed aspect of what the managed print offering is. And also, when we're selling a flat rate option, it's absolutely critical that we sell what the people are buying. Sometimes that's going to be device-centric, and other times it's going to be more user-centric. The point is, it could also be a combination of the two. We're not starting with how this should be billed. We'll get there, trust me. So there are essentially 5 key elements to selling a flat rate program. 1, obviously the value proposition. Number 2 is getting buy-in for the assessment. We'll get to that as well, because I know that scares everybody. Presenting the quotes. Number 4, handling objections. And number 5, and very important, is upselling. So let's take a look at each stage much closer. Number 1, selling the value proposition. So what are we selling in the first place? Putting devices and users to the side just for a little while longer. We're selling a few very simple benefits, if you will, and value propositions that the customer needs to become excited about. One is predictable spend for print and copy. You know, one of the biggest problems we have for paying for print today, even under a cost per page program, is that the spend for customers is really hard to account for, and it's actually tough for us to bill for too. Budgeting, allocating funds, dealing with variability have always made it hard for department heads and those paying the bills to really budget for print. And that's not the case for a flat rate program. The customer can look forward to one fixed flat monthly bill for all their print and copy needs, and that's good for you too, and you'll discover more of that as we go through. The second big value proposition is no more counting, and counting sucks. Wait a minute, I see you, and I see you, And don't worry about it. I see you questioning that's how we do things, right? But at the end of the day, counting for everybody involved is difficult. In standard managed print models, we gather and provide meters with software and manual processes just so we can get a bill out the door. Then the customer has to recount that so they can be sure that what they're paying is what they should be paying. And everyone knows this is true. Firmware updates, software glitches, manual errors from collecting meters, you name it, there's lots of reasons, but invoices aren't always what they should be. But not so with flat rate. Predictable spend, just like we talked about in the first place, right? The third benefit is alignment. Now, under a traditional managed print model, our needs as dealers are often quite different from those of our customers. We want them to print more color, and why? Because we make more money on color than we do with mono. They want to print less color, and why? Because, well, it costs them more money. But under a flat rate program, and chew on this for a second, absolutely everything that was a revenue item before is now a cost. So when the customer prints less color, we make more money. When they spend less, we make more margin and profits on the stuff that we get to keep, and everybody feels a lot more love. When selling a flat rate, those are the three primary benefits that I'd ask you to focus on. And it's actually going to make it easier for the sales reps too. And we just have to work on really understanding those three benefits and getting them across to the customer. It's no longer about which machine is more awesome or why somebody should pay more for your pages versus their pages. We're going to provide reliable print because if we don't, our margins suffer, right? Everything is a cost should be a mantra, maybe even make some t-shirts, and we'll get to more of that as we go through the calculator. Number 2, getting buy-in for the assessment. Whether you decide to charge per device or by user, it's tempting for both you and the customer to try and come up with some kind of pizza menu pricing system. I know, I've had these conversations. So you would charge a certain amount per device based on volumes and be done with it. And simple, for sure, but far too easy for a competitor to come in and try and simply beat you on price. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, that race to the bottom under cost per page that we're currently living through. It won't take long before you're having the same problem with a pizza menu pricing model for flat rate because it's hard, maybe even next to impossible, to sell real value that way. An assessment-based approach will remedy this and ensure that the pricing you sell to your customers is very hard or nearly impossible for a competitor to unpack. And where there's mystery, there's margin, right? That's a mantra we've lived with for as long as I've been in this space. Oh, and before you start freaking out about how hard assessments are, how much time they take, I get it. I've done them, you've done them. This isn't that kind of assessment for you or your customer. The assessment I'm talking about for a flat rate proposal is 100% remote, and it doesn't require walking through a customer location and mapping devices. You'll use a cloud-based software program that gathers user and printer metrics to easily and quickly get all the information you need. The information that you're going to get from this is extremely valuable in building a custom flat rate quote for the customer quickly. If you would like to know more about some of these cloud-based options, please reach out to me and I'll make sure you get the names of some of the ones that I trust the most, or speak with Kenneth Edmonds, who's there today. So, if we're going to do a quick and easy assessment based off data that we collect remotely, we're going to have some real fun presenting the options to the customer. The following proposal that I'm going to take you through after we go through the calculator, so each quote will look different from one to the next, because we're basing it on new information every time. This information will allow us to save the customer more money and solve more problems. Before we go any further, I know that everyone's a little bit scared of applying rules. And it's probably because you've done this yourself in the past, with very difficult installs on the customer premise, then having to get buy-in from people for whatever kinds of rules you're going to put in place. But I can tell you that the world is changing. Just like COVID has taught us about remote work, it's taught us about how the office is changing. So have the tools which allow us to apply these rules and how people are printing. So before we get into the first scenario, I want everyone to just understand for a second, and you can reach out to me or talk to Kenneth, that these software packages, which are now cloud-based, are much easier than ever before to implement at the customer environments. All right, everybody, let's start calculating. So on the first screen here, we're actually going to work through 3 tabs. In this first tab, we're going to do absolutely nothing at all to change how the customer is printing. We're simply going to take what they have today and give them an option which will allow them to pay a fixed budgetable amount every single month. And you'll notice in this example, we're going to be basing it on this one device, that the customer was printing 369 pages of color every month, 5,960 pages in black and white. The cost that they're paying for every color page is 10 cents, and for every black and white page, they're paying a penny. And I've also put in the paper cost per page, and this is very important. The reason being is that the customer actually pays for this, even though we may not be selling it to them, but it's a real physical cost related to their document output. So it's an important one to capture and also generate some savings for. You'll notice here that we're not doing anything. I've got a section for duplex. We're not going to increase that. The contract margin at 40 points is going to remain the same. And over here on the left, you can see that the percent of color pages restricted to black and white is nothing. And the amount of waste page reduction, which would actually happen from authentication at the device terminal, is nothing. And the percent toner saved from software is 0. And there's no new duplex. So this is really important because what we're doing is we're actually just building a quote flat rate based on the customer's current print behaviors. You'll see these sections down here, which we won't spend a lot of time on today, which looks at both the current, the future, and the difference between those two states. Now you'll notice that the difference in this case, as we talked about, is 0. We haven't done anything. We're not changing the way the customer prints at all. Now, what happens though is it does build us an actual revenue line to be able to charge for that customer. So we can see in line 23 that the amount that we're actually going to be charging the customer is $11.58 per month, and that our estimated costs to be able to service that contract are $695 per month. And the dealer profit after the rules and the software costs about $463. So just pay attention to that number for a second. We haven't changed anything. We've simply come up with a way to build them a flat, budgetable amount for their printing. Now, in most cases, you'll actually be able to charge a premium on this. That customers, when you're selling this service to them, because they want the budgetability and the predictability, that is actually worth a premium. So you may actually add additional dollars to the situation, based on the customer's interests. Now, there are some other things down here, which we'll get into a little bit later. For the equipment costs, the markup, the total, the amount of GP that we make on that equipment, the payout, the delivery and installation, and other revenue items, and then the rules and other software. So in this particular case, because we're not doing anything for them, we're going to change that to 0. All right. So that means the total that we're actually going to be financing for that customer based on that device, including the software, is $37.50. Now, as we go down below, you can see what the monthly equipment payment is going to be broken out with the monthly service payment as well for the total monthly for $159 for that piece of equipment. The contract term, 60 months. Anything in green you can actually fill in and change those numbers depending on how long that actual contract term is. And these numbers down here below, I'm not going to touch on these right now because they're going to help us to actually build the commissionable earnings for the sales reps that are selling the flat rate. All right, now moving into tab number 2, which is Rules 1. And what's interesting about this is you should notice I haven't changed anything as far as their color pages per month for the cost. It's all the same cost across the board. What we are going to do, however, is increase their duplex from 0 to 40% with a very simple rule. And what I love about this is that the customer themselves are not going to notice an impact. They don't have to authenticate at the device. They don't have to change their print behavior at all. It's just naturally going to happen at the device level based on the type of document that they are printing. The other rule that we're going to put in place is to actually restrict certain things from being printed in color, such as email and web printing, which are both very simple to do. And in that case, we can reduce about 30% of their print from color and convert that to black and white. And again, these pages aren't disappearing with this rule. They're just being converted to black and white. And now let's see where the magic happens. I want you to ignore this middle column here because this is actually where we're doing the calculations for our math to find out what kind of discount we can offer them and still make money. Now, you remember earlier that I said we were actually going to at least detail what they're paying for their paper. And that's really important because in this scenario, once we actually convert 30% of their color to black and white, and once we increase their duplex to 40%, that's going to automatically lead to 8.81% savings on their spend. Now, in the green column here, this is where we actually start to play with what we're willing to give them back on our service costs, we're going to give them 5%. So if you do the math, you're looking at about 13 or 14% total savings on what they're spending today. Now, the important part here for you as a dealer is to say, well, I don't want to give that away. Why am I going to help them save that? I'm just cutting into my own margins. And you have to remember, everything is a cost. We talked about this earlier. And so now your dealer profits after rules and software costs are actually $477. And the profit increase for you is 3%. So even though you're doing the right thing for the customer, even though you're helping them to reduce their spend by 13 or 14%, you are still taking home 3% more than you were before. So before we go any further, before we actually get into scenario 3, which is where most of the savings can actually happen for a customer, I just want you to think about the calculations that we just did. So 13 or 14% savings for the customer while lifting your profits by 3% or more. Rules are not as complicated or as difficult as they used to be in the past, so forget what you thought you knew when you were doing server-based installs for software from companies like I used to work for and other companies, in which it was a very complicated and difficult install, and not just for you, but for the customer. Nowadays, with these cloud-based options, things are much simpler than ever before. Just like in the early days of Managed Print, and I remember this because I was selling it when I worked at Printfleet and other companies, it was very difficult at first to get you to be convinced that you could get a customer to install a DCA. Now, everyone in this room, wherever you're sitting, you remember those days. And you know now that almost 100% of your accounts where you have a Managed Print offering, there's a DCA installed. What we're dealing with now with these cloud-based platforms, with these as an offering versions for user-based management, it really is taking it to that level. And the way I predict it, in another 5 years, there'll be very few of your customers that you're not offering some kind of user-based rules and management, because there are security benefits as well, and we'll talk to those a little bit later. All right, now we're on my favorite tab of the calculator, period. And in this one, we're actually going to get a little tough with our customers, a little tough love. We're going to introduce some rules which are actually a little harder to swallow, a little harder to implement, but you're going to see why that's important in just a moment. So nothing, again, has changed with what we're charging the customer and what kind of margin we're making, at least on the cost per page side. What is changing, however, though, is on top of the rules we put in place before for color conversion to black and white for web and email printing, and also the duplex increase from 0 to 40%, is that we're now going to introduce authentication at the terminal. Huge security benefits for the customer for doing this, and that's how I would sell it. But traditionally, any engagement I've done where we've incorporated authenticating the device, either with PIN code access, HID card, etc., is a 20% reduction. Look at that number. 20% reduction in overall pages. Now, under a cost per page model, you'd have to be crazy to try and implement a rule like that because that's cutting into revenue. But remember what I said earlier, everything is a cost now. So any pages we can get rid of, any waste we can get rid of, is to our benefit and of the customers. The other thing I have in here is to actually reduce the amount of toner that's being put on the page. And again, everything is a cost. So we can actually pass on this benefit to the customer of cost savings while actually saving costs for ourselves. Here's why that's important. If the customer is willing to incorporate these harder rule sets, that means that the paper savings alone that they're going to get is almost 16%. That's huge. And remember, although we're not charging the customer for paper, they are still paying for that physical property. They're still paying for that. It's still costing them real dollars. Now what we can do is actually add our own savings. Like what kind of discount are we willing to give them based on the scenario? And here I've said 10%. And what that leads to, really importantly, and I'm going to go back to the previous tabs in here in just a second, that our profit is now $544. And was everyone paying attention? You remember what it was before in the current scenario? The rules that we applied simply, $477. And when we didn't apply any rules, our profit was only $463. So every step of the way as we move through this, as we get the customer to do more things to improve their workflow, they save more money and we make more money. So in this scenario, the customer is going to have almost 26% savings over their current spend, and we're going to see an increase in our profits of 17.4%. So again, although I know you may not like rules, your customers may not like rules, one thing we all love is making more money and saving more money. When we started the session today, you remember that I said we're not going to talk about how we're going to bill for this, if it's by device or by user, and we're still not going to talk about that. Because what you really want to present the customer with is a value-based bill. That could be based on the number of devices they have in combination with the number of users that they have. But at the end of the day, they're going to see one single, predictable, budgetable amount for all of their office printing needs. It doesn't matter what those base components are. Now, what I do encourage you to do, and this is what I train everyone that I work with to do, is to present the customer with 3 quotes. And you can remember, as we went through the calculator today, that we had a quote we can give when there are no rules applied, when it's just printing as usual. A second quote, which we can deliver based on some very simple rules to make sure that they're saving some efficiencies and some dollars without really impacting how they print. And the third one, which is harder for them and harder for us, which is going to deliver the most significant impact on what their savings are. Again, it's not about what we want, it's about what the customers are buying. And this proposal you're going to see is going to help you do just that. So here is what a 3-stage flat rate quote can look like. So you'll see here on the first page of the quote that we have the first option. It's $96.50 a month, and it's flat rate, no rules applied. So if you're doing just a strict device-based approach, just want to be able to give your customer that budget ability, here's what it's going to look like. So in this, we get into the details. It's a fixed monthly payment of $96.50 for toner and service. It's a fully budgetable amount for 12 months, and this is important because the contract language, which we're not going to get into today, does talk about the idea of being able to adjust those budgetable amounts for the next 12 months, depending on what their print behavior looks like. Options for excess print and annual contract renewal as a 13th invoice or a new second-year monthly flat rate. And I love giving customers options. If you think about it, anyone that's actually leased a vehicle, you get a certain amount of kilometers that are included with your contract. And should you roll over those, most smart dealerships will give you the ability to simply fold those payments up and actually change the rate that you're paying further down in the term of that agreement. No workflow savings or changes. So we haven't done anything to change how the customer is printing. We haven't done any behavioral stuff. So this is simply giving them that $96.50 a month, which they can bank on for the first 12 months of that contract. So the benefits obviously is simple, it's budgetable, and ensures you'll never count another meter again. What we're going to do now is move into the second quote, and that's by adding the simple rules. And in this scenario, the customer's now looking at $92 a month. We're converting some of that color from email and web printing. We're increasing their duplex. So although there's going to be an impact on what comes out of the devices, it's still not going to impact how the users print. So very simple to do. So they get that fixed monthly payment of $92 a month now, fully budgetable, everything else we talked about. In the green section there, you can see that that's an additional savings for them of $182 a year in physical paper costs. And that's important because that $182 is real money that they're spending, even though we're not charging them for it. The savings, including service and paper, is 13%. So by simply changing a little bit of how they print, letting us put in some simple rules, things that people are not really going to notice impact their workflows, they'll see savings of 13%. Pretty good. The third one, though, and this is where the savings get heavy, is $82 a month. And what we're going to do is all of the things that we did before, only now we're going to actually put in the secure release authentication, which is going to help increase their print security while reducing the amount of pages that they print overall. And in this case, a 20% reduction, which is very common. You talk to anyone, or if you yourselves as dealers have actually incorporated something like PaperCut or Ringdale or another option for these rules, once you get authentication in place, 20% is a very, very easy amount to actually attain. And the toners savor 30%. Now what that's giving the customer in paper savings alone is $328 a year. Now when we add our savings, that's 32% for the customer over what they're paying today. Now the additional benefits, obviously they get the improved document security with secure release authentication, and there will be a slight quality difference from the toner saver. Hopefully one that they can learn to live with. Now, as we've gone through this session today, anyone that's been paying attention has noticed something, that the shirts I've been wearing have been different colors all the way through. I've had a red one, I've had a blue one, I've had a black one, I've had a pink one. Entirely through the presentation, I have changed these shirts And a very small thing, but it's something Kenneth Edmonds, who's there today, is going to like very much. It's something I like to call a purple cow. And the reason it's important is what I've done is not very significant. Simply changed the color of my shirt, and you've paid attention and you've noticed that something was different. And you're probably wondering why. And the only reason was because of this concept of the purple cow and how we build out these quotes for flat rate. Now, flat rate isn't something entirely different for the customer. It is the same technology that you're delivering for printers and copiers. It is the same dependability on the service that you're renowned for. It is the same productivity that they're going to be doing with those printers and those documents in the first place. The only difference is those three things that we talked about at the beginning. The first benefit being that there's 100% budgetability. The second thing is that they don't have to count meters anymore, and neither do you. And the third thing is that there's this alignment finally between the customer and you, which you can talk about openly and freely. The more that you can save them, the more that you're going to keep, which means that what you want and what they want is exactly the same. And how cool is that? Now, as promised, our final section of today's training on flat rate is how you actually pay the reps for delivering on flat rate. And the honest truth is it has to be very different from the way we do it today. Today, currently, for most of us, we're actually compensating our reps on a percent of the gross profit that's generated on the equipment. People are starting to buy more A4 printers versus the A3. It's been happening for years, but with the pandemic and remote work, it has been accelerated. So to pay reps on that percentage of hardware revenue like we used to simply doesn't make sense anymore, not for them. And as you know, sales reps are looking for opportunities in other industries that are growing so that they can make more money, because under the GP model, under hardware right now, in our industry, they're not making money like they used to. So suffice to say, that model doesn't work for them. It also doesn't work for the customer, because they know that oftentimes they're going to get equipment which might be a little bit bigger, which might have more features than they necessarily need, because the rep's actually getting paid on those features and that extra size. I'm not saying that happens, but it could. What we need to do is look at a new way of doing it under flat rate, and there are really two methods to do this. The first method is a percent of total revenue on the contract. So if you think about it, you could charge 5%, 6%, or 7% based on both the hardware and the service piece, which is traditionally something that we haven't ever done before. But changing times call for changing actions. And the percent revenue is a very simple way to do that. You would basically make sure that you're doing it on a year-to-year basis. Now there's a second way to do it, and it's actually probably my preferred method of doing it. And I didn't make it up. I stole it from somebody that I like a lot. You might know him, Kevin Morris at OneDoc, and he's been paying his reps in this model for years, even under a cost per page program before flat rate. They're making a book of business that they weren't making before. And they're going to be making this money before they get out of bed every day. Now, there is a way to make this safe. We make sure that they still have it tied to a quota. And again, this is something that I've learned from many dealers over the years, that you can actually base the annuity on their quota retention. So if they manage to get 75% of quota or more, they get their annuity. If they don't get 75% of their new business quota, they don't get that annuity for the quarter. And what that does is that inspires the reps to make sure that they're still chasing that new business, while at the same time wanting to keep control of the money that they're making on that annuity. It's pretty cool. So let's take a second and actually look at what that looks like in the calculations. For everyone watching, this is the same calculator that we actually use to build the quote in the first place, so that all the numbers tie together as you roll down through the calculations for the commissionable earnings. And what I want you to pay attention to is that I've actually got the old way, I call it the current method, I should probably change it to the old method, of how they're being paid today. So in this case, if the rep was being paid 30% GP, they would make $375 on that deal. And then the equipment share and the service profit below are what's there for you to make sure you understand what is exactly the revenue we're making that deal. But what we're doing up here, if we look at row 54, I've got a 5% value, a 6% value, and a 7% value. And you can see what the rep's going to get paid and how much the profit, the net commission, profit's going to be left over once we've netted the commission out of the deal. So 87%, 84%, and 81%, still very healthy. Over here on the right-hand side, we've actually got the second method I was talking about, which I actually really prefer, which is paying them less on the hardware, because remember, that hardware piece is getting smaller all the time anyway. It's not something that we're doing, it's something that the market is actually driving. So that's going to be less important for how the reps are being paid, how they make their money. And in this case, we've actually reduced it from that 30% to 15%. And on the annuity side, we're charging 002 for that sales rep for every page that's printed that they're going to get paid for. Now, here's where the magic happens for the sales reps. So their first year commission is going to be, pretty humble, $339. But remember, their total commission before was $375. So they're only making a little bit less than they would have on the first year commission that they were making for the total deal payout under the old way of doing it. The commission contract term, they're going to make $946 based on that annuity. And what's important about this is that you can say to the reps, as long as they're willing to stay the course, as long as they're willing to stay with you, keep the customer satisfied, that they're going to make $572 more on this same deal than they would have if they were just actually selling it as a hardware deal. So really good for the sales reps. So the sales rep makes more, and that's only based on the customer being satisfied. So it is a much better way to make sure their alignment with the customer continues through the life of the contract. Well, and all good things must come to an end. If I've done my job correctly, you found some new value propositions to get across to the customer, which really aren't that difficult to sell, that you understand how you can actually build a flat rate quote yourself using very simple numbers, that you can actually compensate your reps in a way that's going to inspire them to continue to sell this, and that there is still plenty of life left in this thing that we call managed print. I'm really sad that I can't be there in person with you. I was hoping after 2 years of not having been across the border that this would finally be that time, and unfortunately it didn't work out that way. But I am so honored by the BTA, and I just want to thank Brent and Valerie and Deborah and everybody that's helped put this together for you today to help you to grow your managed print business and to move into the future. Anything at all that you have, either today or in the future, I am your humble servant. So thank you very much. So get out there, enjoy some more learning track throughout the rest of the day. Enjoy your time in Asheville, fall colors, and I look forward to seeing you soon in the future. Thank you.